We are united in diversity. We are very heterogeneous in our opinion.
We are doing this in our open democracies. Discussion is all open and loud, and I'm not for that.
What is European Union? What is freedom? How we learn together?
The obvious question is, what is the EU doing? What is our plan?
Good afternoon. Thank you all for being here. Wow, we have a full house. I'm Sarah Wheaton. I'm Politico's new, I have to get used to this title, I'm our new agriculture and food editor, host of the EU Confidential podcast, and your host today for the event, Biotech, Innovate, or Stagnate. Now, I've been having, in the more kind of podcasty context, a lot of talk about how Europe has this need to be, if it's not really going to be strategic, have strategic autonomy, it needs to have strategic indispensability. And when I'm like, oh, well, what sector can we do that in? I always hear biotech. And indeed, Europe has a world-leading biotech sector. Its scientists have discovered some of the most important biological medicines of our time, like, hello, the COVID vaccines. But it's now losing ground to the United States and China. The US attracts innovators thanks in large part still to its easier access to capital. Investors there are willing to take greater risks for greater rewards. While China is edging ahead with its clinical trials of novel therapies, especially in rare diseases. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has tasked the Health Directorate with delivering a Biotech Act to ensure Europe doesn't lose any more ground in this field, not only for the medicine sector, but also biotech information across areas like novel foods, lab-grown meat and fermented products, biological household products, and agents used in farming. We're gonna delve into what a good Biotech Act might look like in just a minute. But first, a warm thanks to those of you here in Brussels and to those of you joining us online. At Politico, we want an interactive discussion, so you can submit questions at any time through Slido using the hashtag #PoweringEUBiotech. And just a little word to the wise, with me specifically, I really like it if people cite their name and affiliation. I'll be much more likely to take your question if you include that. I'd like to thank our partner Bayer for making this event possible, and we want to hear from you right away. So take a moment to answer the poll presented by Bayer. What is Europe's biggest barrier to biotech innovation? We'll look at the results at the end of the discussion. So before we get started with that discussion, let's hear a short introduction from Frank Terhorst, Executive Vice President for Strategy and Sustainability at Bayer.
Thank you, Sarah, and good afternoon, everyone in the room in Brussels, but of course also online. It's really a pleasure to open today's discussion on what truly could be Europe's biotech moment. Biotechnology is not just another industry. It's a key lever for Europe's competitiveness, one that will shape our health, our food security, and our climate resilience for generations. The Commission has identified biotechnology among its top 10 critical sectors for the European Union's economic security. President von der Leyen has announced that she wants Europe to make the most of the biotech revolution. Encouraging science are emerging in the upcoming Biotech Act, but we are yet to see most of these intentions translated into action. The question before us is relatively simple. Will Europe lead or will it lag behind? Europe remains a global powerhouse in science. Our universities and research institutes are second to none. But we all know the uncomfortable truth. We are not as good at turning that science into benefits for society. 30 years ago, half of all new medicines were developed in Europe. Today, it's just 1 in 5. And in agriculture, while European scientists pioneer gene-edited crops and green biotechnologies, those innovations reach farmers first in North and South America, not here at home. If we want biotechnology to drive growth, resilience, and prosperity, we need policy that matches our scientific excellence with the same excellence in innovation. And nowhere is this need more urgent than in agriculture. Across Europe, farmers face mounting pressure to produce more with less. Less land, less water, fewer inputs, all while facing harsher climates and unpredictable weather. Yet, with the right innovation, agriculture can move from being seen as part of the problem to being recognized as a vital part of the solution. New genomic techniques are one key example. These allow us to develop crops that can withstand drought and heat, use nitrogen more efficiently, resist new pests, and improve nutritional value, helping farmers secure their livelihoods while supporting the planet. We are talking about a technology that has the potential to strengthen our food system, empower farmers, and support Europe's broader competitiveness and sustainability goals at the same time. But for that to happen, Europe needs an enabling science-based regulatory framework. The NGT regulation must be adopted as soon as possible so that innovative, resilient crops can reach European farmers. The same holds true in health. The pharmaceutical sector being a strategic one for Europe, healthcare biotech is uniquely positioned to simultaneously drive two key pillars of our future: better health and economic growth. Europe's scientists are leading breakthroughs in cell and gene therapy, technologies that could prevent, even reverse, diseases that today have no cure. But too often, those therapies are developed or first made available elsewhere because of our frameworks are too slow, too fragmented, or too uncertain. Most European biotech choose to go public on the Nasdaq due to lack of capital in Europe. Equally, incentives such as intellectual property rights also play a decisive role. They give innovators the confidence to invest in high-risk, high-reward science, and they enable early knowledge sharing that accelerates progress. If we continue to regulate yesterday's risk while others build tomorrow's cures, we will fall further behind. This is why the upcoming EU Biotech Act is so important. It must not stop at health. A second complementary act should complete the picture, putting forward an equally ambitious agenda for agricultural and industrial biotechnology as the basis for a strong European bioeconomy. Europe has the chance to create a comprehensive framework that rewards innovation, accelerates access, and ensures our discoveries benefit society, not bureaucracy. In view of the Commission's simplification agenda, the Biotech Act must be seen as a catalyst to drive industrial competitiveness rather than a new layer of regulation. It must deliver a framework with intellectual property protection as cornerstone. A strong IP framework ensures return on investment stimulates R&D, and ultimately delivers solutions for farmers and patients. Without that, investors will look elsewhere and innovation will follow. A vibrant biotech sector is a strategic necessity for economic resilience, for health and food security, and for Europe's role on the global stage. At Bayer, we are eager to provide farmers and patients alike with the breakthroughs they need, made in Europe, for Europe and the world. Like us, many innovators across the continent are impatient to untap the full potential of biotech for our society. So let's make sure that this really is Europe's biotech moment, a moment to turn our scientific excellence into global leadership. Thank you. I wish us all a productive discussion. And with that, back to you, Sarah.
Thank you so much, Frank. And actually, keep clapping, please, as our panel joins us on the stage. Thanks to all of you for being here this evening. Now, before I get deep into it, we should just acknowledge a bit of a reality. The Biotech Act is kind of chaotic up to this point. It's probably why so many of you are here to try to get a handle on what's going on. And we are thrilled to have you here, but there is a key representative who is not here, and that is the European Commission. And I think that reflects some of the chaos. We reached out, we sent more than 10 invitations to DG Santé, DG Grow, DG RTD, and even Commissioner's Cabinet, and as you can see, no takers. But again, glad to have you here to help us get a handle on it, or at least what we are hoping to see. And I'll start with a rapid fire question, looking a bit at the issue that's been in the news. As Frank said, nothing is more urgent than for the Biotech Act than agriculture. And yet we just learned that they'll be splitting the act in two, with sort of the health section coming out next month and the kind of broader section coming out in the third quarter of 2026. So to each of you, pick one. Is this a good way to sort of make sure that we're doing bespoke regulation and really being able to deliberate on the broader legislation? Or is this an unnecessary delay that risks duplicating issues? Claire, you can start. You got to pick one.
I'm not going to pick one.
I'm shocked.
I know, shocked, I tell you. So we also understand that the first part will also extend beyond health, because of course Santé covers regulation from lots of different sectors. And I think from what we see before is it's a practical outcome for it's kind of matching political expediency with what the Act needs to achieve overall. What we want to see is something that is progressive and ambitious. And, as Frank said, it needs to be structurally modern and forward-looking, but it also needs to be well done. So what we would like to see is certainly something that is robust, scientifically incredibly accurate, which we know it can be, but also takes the time to get it right so that we're not fixing things in future through omnibuses. It needs both parts, whether they go together or are separate. We work with that, but what we do need is for them both to perform very strongly.
Christian, do you have any concerns about splitting them?
Well, since I think now it's clear that we have this Biotech Act in two parts, I'm not so concerned, because obviously we are more ready with the health aspects of the Biotech Act. Secondly, right now we are discussing important pharma legislation, Critical Medicines Act. Maybe it makes sense to try and do it almost simultaneously, because some of the issues that will probably be in the health part of the Biotech Act can be matched with the discussions on the Critical Medicines Act, on the pharma legislation, where we also see some changes. So I think it might be actually clever so that we don't mix it in a very complex legislation, and that will be easier for the Parliament as well if we can focus first on one part and then we'll do the second one.
Okay, good reviews, Hampton. Let me get your take. And then also, after answering that, can you kind of step back for us? You've done some research, like on behalf of the Commission, to help them kind of understand some of the issues at hand. Where does Europe stand relative to the US and China right now as far as its biotech sector?
Yeah, no, thank you. So on your first question, I would not be doing my job as a researcher if I didn't say it depends. It is complicated, and really whether or not it's a good idea depends on how well it is executed. There's a lot of policy in this space that's trying to cover multiple different areas. We're thinking about competitiveness. We're thinking about innovation ecosystems. We're thinking about geopolitical stability. We're thinking about public trust. These are today's problems, not tomorrow's. It makes sense to try and address them as quickly as possible. But the questions that we're answering and the answers that we are posing have to be the right ones, and they have to be robust, and they have to be rooted in evidence. In terms of the wider question on competitiveness, I think it's one that I'd like to be a little bit optimistic about if I can. Obviously, we know that Europe has traditionally underperformed specifically in areas related to venture capital availability, IPOs, and exit opportunities, and then, of course, regulation. I could see the poll ticking up there with how many people are interested in talking about that. But there is an opportunity here. The geopolitical landscape is changing very quickly, and Europe really has an opportunity here to be a stable partner of choice. We see a lot of volatility in terms of the financial landscape, in particular for pharmaceutical drugs, as well as an opportunity to establish really innovative and evidence-based regulation in this space. And so I'd like to be optimistic about that. There are headwinds, particularly from the US and China, but there are ways that Europe can seize on its competitive advantage here as well.
And Claire, I'm intrigued by a little something that you seem confident that the first part would have a little more than health. Can you walk us through kind of what you understand about it?
Obviously things change day by day, and nothing, I'll finally read it when it emerges on the 16th, when we see it later this year. But yeah, it is our understanding that it's going to stretch further than health, particularly from a regulatory perspective. And that's really great because there's a huge amount of regulatory strength and expertise inside DG Santé, and a lot of the actions that we would love to see inside the Biotech Act, they know exactly how they could help smooth regulatory pathways, look slightly more progressively towards how you fit Europe's incredible safety standards, but speed up the process in which products can get to market. But as you say, it sits within a complex landscape at the moment. There are lots of omnibuses on the go at the moment. There are other legislations that are open. What we need to do is make sure that the Biotech Act is not sort of somewhere that the leftover bits go, but a genuinely progressive regulatory pathway in itself.
What do you mean when you use the term progressive?
I think, well, it's future looking. If we're using omnibuses to fix what needed fixing in existing legislation, it's like, how do we make future legislation, perhaps more product oriented rather than process oriented, as you see in so many other global regions. Our safety standards are incredibly high. They are gold standard worldwide, and we can achieve a lot of significant market uptake with a slightly different way to how we look at novel technologies. We talk about regulatory sandboxes a lot. So you can have a fit-for-purpose method of looking at very novel technologies that have been implemented elsewhere in the world, but are trying to fit into regulatory frameworks that were designed in the past here.
And we've got regulatory sandbox. That's sort of an area where people can experiment without having to
It's where regulators and innovators can talk together and work together and go, I've got something that works in this particular way. It absolutely does not fit the box there in terms of you ask for something that was designed for, let's say, petrochemicals. I'm bringing you something biological. And it's to design the way that you assess something safely, but not necessarily trying to force it into the existing sort of framework.
And we are expecting to see this Biotech Act 1 focus on health come out without an impact assessment. You've all praised the idea that we're going to move a little more slowly on the second part. Are there any concerns that this first part is being rushed? Christian?
I would like to add something to what my colleagues at the panel mentioned. Just for the general framework, you know, we always tend to compare with the United States, with China, but in my opinion, we will not succeed if we just try to mirror their examples, because they have very different systems. I believe that we need to find our own European model where we encourage innovation, encourage biotechnologies, but at the same time, we keep high safety standards, and we keep what distinguishes from those two regions, that we put in first place the citizen, the patient, the consumer, so that the rights of people are preserved. So this is, I know it's tricky, that's why I believe that we should not rush. We really have to carefully consider what we are exactly doing. You're right, Claire, that now we have a number of omnibuses which are under consideration. Voting is starting in plenary as well. These omnibuses will solve partially the problems that companies face also in this sector of biotechnologies. And then the second part, which will be much more focused on research, research and development, investment, financing, scaling up of startups, this part of the Biotech Act will have already the information and maybe the analysis, what has happened with these omnibuses, where we are there, so that we can focus on what needs more to be done. Because otherwise we risk to mix different legislative initiatives, and that's, you see that I'm a bit cautious on all this, because then finally I have to vote in Parliament and to work with the colleagues. Already now we face this with this rushing of the Commission with the omnibuses leads to the fact that the legislation that is being proposed is very complex. It's very difficult to distinguish responsibilities of our own committees, who is doing what. With one legislative act, we are changing, like, for example, 4 regulations, 3 directives. It's really, we need to be sometimes a bit slower so that we make the best out of all this. So therefore, I don't think that we are slow, and I believe that the pace is right. The question is how we do it so that we preserve our European model, at the same time become even more competitive in implementing the research where we are already leading.
But you're not concerned that there's no impact assessment for the first part?
I'm sure that the Parliament, for example, will assess very carefully what has been proposed. It again depends. At this point of time, I don't know what we'll see in this first part of the Biotech Act. We don't know what would be the scale of all of it, because, as I said, we already have a number of initiatives going on in the health sector. So probably this first part will be not so complex, and it will be much easier to handle it than the second part that we expect next year.
Hamden, I want you to help us understand a bit more. What might a European model look like? And you know, I hear what you're saying, Christian, that we don't want to just copy China and the US, but are there some things that might be worth emulating somewhat?
Well, I'm not quite sure about emulating. That point really struck me about building a European-specific ecosystem. There's always a place for evidence drawing on international comparison, but at the same time, path dependency is a real thing. Europe has its own set of circumstances, and we need to sort of address that, mostly in the field of regulation, as well as in other areas. You know, there's quite a lot that's already there. But there's quite a few areas I think could be addressed. In our work, a lot of the time we talk about these different sort of levers or buttons that you can push to encourage a good innovation ecosystem. a few of them that stick out to me here, particularly regulation, but also thinking about things like data, information, and evidence, physical infrastructure, as well as public trust and public involvement. I think those are things that are all really quite interesting in this space.
Can you tell me more about this public trust and public involvement? Like, what are you sensing are some of the big kind of risk areas with this act, and how can policymakers and politicians confront them?
Well, I mean, it really is about science and the sector more broadly, not necessarily the act specifically. We do see quite a lot of discourse out there about vaccine hesitancy and uptake, which is obviously something that falls in the purview of biotechnology. There's also areas relevant to agriculture and things like that, with genetically modified organics, which is something that some are concerned about. I think what's important there is meeting people where they are, understanding and addressing concerns as they arise. But it's also quite important not only for regulation, but also for markets. Regulation can't be so stringent that it chokes innovation. But at the same time, we can't make it so lax that it creates concerns about safety. Additionally, good markets rely on safe products as well. So there's quite a lot of interplay between these different elements of this ecosystem. And I do think it's something that really is important to be addressed.
Mm-hmm. Christian, are you hearing from just regular citizens? And I guess sort of my bigger question is, we hear a lot of concern, just worry about, genetically modified agriculture. We hear, I can tell you as the new agriculture editor, there's a lot of anger about the idea from kind of ranchers about the idea of lab-grown meat. Do European citizens want to move forward in this sector?
I was about to raise this issue, by the way, because the introduction from Bayer, we've heard about this GMOs and genetically new genomic technologies and so on. Again, it's easy to discuss this issue from the point of view of research, for example, or somebody from the business, but we in Commission and especially in Parliament, we represent people. So we need to take into account their concerns. And as you know, so far, the European Parliament has stopped the introduction of any new product which is genetically modified. And I don't think that this will change within this parliament, and maybe should not change. I mean, these are issues which, on one hand, we need to build trust of the people with regard to the new legislation. They have to be ensured that whatever we do is not, on one hand, we need to be, of course, more competitive. We need to create conditions for better treatments in hospitals, all the new achievements of the current science, but at the same time, people should be assured that it's safe. They should have trust in what we are doing and what then the business will do when we create this better environment for the business. So this is very difficult to find the right balance. That's why, again, I say I'm quite cautious because I mean, in the best case scenario, we probably for some, we'll remove all the regulation, we'll create such a nice environment where there will be finances, we'll encourage companies risking new therapies and so on, but there will be no trust of people in this. So we need to be very careful in that. Of course, at the same time, if we have, as you mentioned, a science-based confirmation of products that are safe for people, products or therapies, whatever, then we need to make sure that people understand that. Maybe I should also mention that we live in a very, in a media environment which favors this type of propaganda against everything new, like against vaccines, against any new achievements of the science. You see, which I'm surprised, more and more people in Europe that believe in flat Earth, for example. So, I mean, you have to take into account all this, you know, when we rush to change legislation and try to accelerate these new developments in the biotech sector.
Claire, you want to come in here?
Yeah, I do. I think it's really interesting because often the discussion becomes very polarized around a small number of topics because they're easy to weaponize. When we look at industrial biotechnology, for example, within Europa Bio, the use of microorganisms to manufacture products, that's already an incredible industrial capacity within Europe. And it's literally what future of manufacturing looks like. When you look, I think Europe has one of the largest fermentation capacities for microorganisms in the world. It's one of the reasons why President Biden set up the executive order, I think, in 2022 on boosting biomanufacturing in the US, because it was lagging so far behind Europe. So we have an enormous microbial manufacturing capacity that produces chemical intermediates, it produces food ingredients. This is literally what biomanufacturing is. And when you look at the economic stats behind that, they're very significant. It's about 3 times more productive a sector than the EU average. The employment rate within industrial biotech is rising at 6 times the EU average. It's literally the definition of a knowledge-driven economy. So I think people often look at biotech as something that's coming in the future, but it's been an immense economic tool for us for decades already. And so what we want to do when we look at this is, what does our economic future look like? How do we make our supply chain stable? How do we serve the whole agri-food supply chain with, say, biocontrol agents, for example, so that you can have healthier animals, healthier plants? How do we reduce our dependence on extended and stretched supply chains? So it's really, and when you look at other global regions, let's look at India, for example. If you look at the biomanufacturing there, it's accelerating so incredibly quickly. This is what it looks like. So we either make the transition or we obsolesce. It's a really simple thing. It's not that we can carry on doing the way things we are doing the way they are now. It has to change because the whole world is changing. And biotech is absolutely the definition of how we do it. And there's no hint of anybody wanting to change safety standards. It's literally about how we make regulatory frameworks work better to those safety standards and help greater market access here, because that will bring the employment, the manufacturing, the capacity and the skills here, which is what we definitely want.
I'm going to stay on kind of vaguely with this issue of trust. With one of the questions from the audience, they identified themselves as a university student. The question is, AI models are openly accessible and require no specific knowledge to engineer and misuse a toxic agent. Are we prepared to counter this?
Well, I think that there is, it's good that the AI issue is mentioned as well, because now AI is more and more used also in developing biotechnologies. And it's true that also at the level of AI, we are also lagging behind. So it's interlinked. I don't say that we now need to change completely our model on AI as well and deregulate what we have achieved already. But also there, I think you see how complex it is. And not, of course, not all AI models are free and public. I mean, there are different models and different AI systems which encourage research and development in biotech sector. It's also a matter of security sometimes, biosecurity, because it, I mean, through the AI, some technologies become available for much larger entities, which was not the case in the past. So here, I think we need to do more also to develop our digital, to further strengthen the digital transformation, to support our AI system so that we can catch up also on biotech level. You see how complex it is. Plus you mentioned the financial part, the financing. I mean, here as well, we do not have these tools that the Americans, for example, have, or the Chinese in a different way. On one hand, you have the state support. In China, you have the risk capital in the United States. We don't have these tools in Europe, so we have to develop them as well. So you see, in addition, we need to develop further our financial sector and the opportunities that, for example, we can create through the European Investment Bank. So it's not just the biotech, I mean, and the biotech regulation. It's a lot of other elements should come together so that we can make this jump that we want to do.
Mm-hmm. But I'm not really hearing if I can speak for this anonymous university student, I'm not hearing a lot of reassurance that this Biotech Act will protect us from people weaponizing some of these new technologies. Hampton, is that a legitimate concern?
Well, I mean, it is definitely something to consider. And what I will say is I'm in no way a Luddite about innovation, having done research on the value of innovation to health systems for patients, the economy, and things like that. You know, obviously, it's important to facilitate innovation and not regulate these things out of existence. There are some concerns, though. So in our submission to the EU Biotech Act call for evidence, we did talk about a few specific examples, specifically synthetic DNA, the ability of sort of individuals to be able to order synthetic DNA online, and there only being voluntary mechanisms for screening who is actually ordering that. Now, synthetic DNA can be incredibly important for research, particularly in the pharmaceutical, health, life sciences sector, and can help create life-changing personalized treatments. If misused, there is a potential danger there, and that's something that definitely should be addressed. I think what the student is also getting across as well is something that we found quite interesting, is that these biotechnologies on their own, there's always been a potential for bad actors. What the issue is here is the potential for AI to be an amplifier and an easier tool for access for people who are not specially trained in that space. And again, yes, that is a concern. So there's two things here, I think, first of all. It's about what is appropriate to be mandatory versus voluntary, including in the space of synthetic DNA screening. But it's also about that expertise in regulatory science. We've seen really promising progress in certain areas, looking at how you regulate these technologies as they develop, and you have industry and regulators working hand in hand to work on that. So again, there is opportunity, but we have to be realistic about the risks.
Yeah, I was going to say, and that really reinforces the need for the expertise to lie here in Europe, because you can't see what's coming towards you if you can't read what it is. You don't know it's coming. And as places like the US move out of intellectual leading areas, it's a responsibility of Europe to move into those areas. So I absolutely agree, because we need to have the skills and the capacity in Europe to understand what is going on globally, because just because something is not available in Europe doesn't mean to say it's not available everywhere else. And you also see that you could use the same reason to look at climate change-induced changes in disease profiles, for example. You have to understand what is happening if you are going to mitigate, prevent, respond. So that is another reason why things like the Biotech Act need to help consolidate biotech expertise in Europe, because then we are able to be sort of masters of our own destiny so much more strongly, even for things happening outside our borders.
Mm-hmm. And I want to also just pull you in a little more specifically, Claire, on this AI question. We haven't really heard a lot from Health Commissioner Vahey on this, but we do know that he really thinks the Biotech Act will focus a lot on AI. Are you kind of content with the vision as it, to the extent it's been laid out?
I mean, to be honest, yes, because you've got biotechnology, it's an enabling technology. You've got AI, it's an enabling technology. You are already seeing massive increases in pace of production of medicines into preclinical phases. So it's a basic competitiveness element. If it's going to take you 2 years versus 10 years to bring a product to clinical trial, you need to be in that 2-year bucket, because nobody is going to give you money to spend 10 years bringing something to a clinical trial. So I am very keen to ensure that often very different and contrary regulatory frameworks allow this to happen. And that means, growing regulatory agent capabilities. It's regulatory agencies working together. We can't not use this. It is absolutely critical.
Do we need, Christian, I want to go to you. I mean, we've been talking about all these different pieces of legislation floating around out there. Is the Biotech Act really the best one to be keeping, or drawing these high-tech keeping these high-tech industries in Europe? Or are we better off with something like, sticking with the Green Industrial Plan, just more funding in the MFF? Would those be just as good options?
Well, again, they should work together. And I think one of the big added values of the Biotech Act is the whole discussion that we have around it. because without this initiative, we wouldn't probably discuss that today here, and we have a number of, maybe hundreds of discussions throughout Europe that encourage everyone who has something to say and has proposed something to do, how to make Europe better, more competitive in this sector. This initiative has encouraged all this debate. So I think the Biotech Act has already achieved part of its goals, in my opinion. But yes, I believe that we need a center of this legislation. Around it, we can do a lot of other things. We have to, of course, but you need a focus of this legislation. That's why I think the Biotech Act is an excellent idea, and we need to make full use of it. Of course, through this legislation, we can also change some other regulations which are long overdue probably, or were very good at their time, but now things develop very quickly in the past several years. And probably, for example, this clinical trials regulation needs updating. Also, advanced therapy medicinal products regulation needs updating. I believe so, and I suppose that this first part of the Biotech Act regarding the health aspects will address these issues as well. And for the second, of course, it's to be seen, but we will have enough time to work also with the Commission and the responsible people to make full use of it. And I would say here that the Parliament had an important role in all this, because we adopted an own initiative report already in July this year, where we indicated a number of elements that we want to see in this upcoming legislation, and will be active partner to the Commission, of course, to universities, businesses, so that we can use this opportunity to make it really helpful and useful, and to really prepare a breakthrough for the bio industry in Europe.
I want to stay with something you said. You talked about you invoked the clinical trials regulation. That's also getting an update this year to speed up approvals of multi-country studies. Is there any risk of over-regulating trials rather than kind of achieving this simplification push?
Well, in my opinion, it's quite extensively regulated at this moment. Again, we have to be cautious. I mean, I don't want to create the impression that now we'll open the door for whatever, to speed up in a way that it becomes harmful for people without enough evidences. So again, I'm cautious, careful. But obviously, we need some improvements there as well. And in some cases, there's no need to duplicate trials, to duplicate approvals, being at European than at national level. So we need to be more, to trust our institutions and also to be more, I wouldn't call it flexible, but really not, if we do not duplicate the same thing first on European level and then on national level, or something which is already approved at national level should be used as a basis to speed up the process at European level. I mean, all this should be used in the best possible way because we live in a rapidly changing and developing world. We don't have time to make things the way we did even a few years ago. But again, safety first. Huh?
Mm-hmm. Claire, do you see the Act ultimately kind of achieving this goal of helping the industry enter the market from Europe?
I think it has to. I mean, we had a really good biomanufacturing policy summit a few weeks back where there was a really good cross-community discussion. And what came out very quickly, it was that at the very heart of this Biotech Act, and it goes to what you were saying as well, is this is a great time to be discussing what biotech can do for us. Rather than it being hidden away behind products across multiple sectors, bring it out, you look at it for its own merits as a critical technology in Europe. And at the very heart of it was a progressive regulatory framework that suits the technology that's going in it, upholds Europe's world-leading safety standards, and ensures that we make the most of the science and the discoveries that we have here.
But, I mean, what are just some key things that you're really expecting to see?
I think fit for purpose future-looking regulations. And I'd say that separately to the omnibuses, which are like tightening screws here, tidying things up there. I would like something to be designed for biotechnology rather than sort of squishing it into systems that were designed for other technologies. You know, I was thinking of examples while we were talking, and it was like when you go through the regulatory process, and the regulatory process goes, I'm going to make you fit in this square box because all the other things fit in this square box, and you have a round product. It's not that the product is less safe, it just doesn't fit into a square box. So I would like to see a progressive regulatory framework designed from biotech onwards. And also, because I'm a Star Trek fan, I will talk about, I would like to see wormholes, like regulatory sandboxes, both within a particular regulatory agency and between them as well, so that you don't start by going, well, you have to fit all of these requirements in two places and they're completely different, that you go, how does this work down the middle? And I think the Biotech Act can do that.
I'm just going to take a brief moment to look a bit more closely, because I'm trying to listen while looking at the questions at the same time. So I'll take a question from Neha Dave. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name, but thank you for putting it. How would you see EU international partnerships as tools for increasing talent and innovation in Europe while protecting standards and ethics?
I can talk about trade agreements. I mean, global supply chains are critical, and so you can never become fully autonomous in an area, and biotech is medicines are super complicated, food is super complicated. So strong, solid, trusted frameworks between different global regions are exactly what we need to do to make sure that the values of both partners are fully respected, the strengths are both used, and the weaknesses are supported. You know, it's literally how it works.
I think also that person maybe was asking about, human, like, researchers. Hampton.
If I can come in on that as well, I am going to take a step back because, again, as a researcher, I feel like that's my job. But that point that I made earlier about the potential for Europe to be sort of this partner of choice, this stable leader, that bit about addressing shared challenges is really crucial. And as we have seen in the last few years, pandemic preparedness and addressing the threat of antimicrobial resistance are two really big elements of that. So there is a potential to build frameworks that are specifically towards those aims, but also thinking about our shared goals, thinking about incentives, the public trust element of that as well. And so I think that is something that could be really helpful. I mean, it comes in line with a bunch of the other levers that I talked about that I'm not going to stop talking about, including sort of platform-based regulation, creating those wormholes between human health, animal health, planetary health, different kinds of surveillance of pathogens in wastewater, humans, animals, et cetera. So ensuring that we've got technologies in that space that are regulated appropriately, but that we also have the data infrastructure so that when we have good technologies in that space that are producing really interesting findings, that those findings get to the right people and help to achieve broader One Health objectives.
If I may add something here, of course we need these global partnerships because the challenges are global. As you rightly mentioned, of course, whatever we do within the European Union, if we talk about, for example, data protection, okay, well, as long as we are here within our borders, we're very well protected in our data. But in today's world, if you can't develop also probably global framework, global regulations on some issues. I know regulation doesn't sound good, but at least we need some rules, being it on data protection, being it on AI, because I see that this issue is becoming already a discussion both in China and the United States as well. You cannot have everything free out of regulation. And the same on biotechnologies. We may, on one hand, we should encourage partnerships between researchers, businesses, but at the same time, we need to encourage also partnership between regulators because we need common global rules on some of those issues because it may become, the biosecurity, for example, is a global problem. So we need to address it globally. From that point of view, of course, the world is so global today, we need global efforts in addition to our own here within the EU borders.
I'm going to take a question from Carl from Future Matters, who says that media is reporting that the Commission considers an InvestEU investment instrument for biotech. So Carl wanted to ask this question to Claire: what would the industrial biotech sector need from that?
I think what we would love to be able, obviously we speak for all sectors in biotech, but they have very different investment needs and timescales and capabilities of raising that kind of funding. We would love to see the scaling of industrial biotechnology capacity within Europe, particularly from earlier innovators, because we had an amazing conversation when we talked about industrial biotechnology allows many new players to come into the field. It is very, we've seen a huge number of SMEs in this field, so it's a great equalizer in many ways. We would love to see investment to enable the scale up more quickly in Europe, and that goes in lots of different ways. It's often companies have to be too mature. They have to have a product that they can already sell, but before they can achieve investment to scale up. But then that doesn't work. They can't sell a product until they have scaled that product. I would love to see a much more progressive approach using the EIB, using any lever possible, including NASDAQ options within Europe, for example, to enable rapid scale up of novel technologies, because nobody is a loser from this. It's capacity that's also highly flexible. It's not highly specialized. So it means that it can be adapted for products between different sectors. So I think rapid scale up of innovators within Europe would be an amazing thing to achieve.
Mm-hmm. And our most popular question is one that that I feel like we have not kind of understandably touched on in many different ways, but I'll go ahead and throw it out one more time. Some of the current regulatory bottlenecks are due to discrepancies in member states' approaches and implementation. How will the Biotech Act address this? Hampton, are there kind of specific areas maybe that haven't been addressed yet that where we need more harmonization across member states?
In terms of harmonization across member states, I think there might be somebody who's a little bit better to comment. But in terms of thinking about different spaces where those regulatory wormholes need to be made, as I already mentioned, I think that the pandemic preparedness and surveillance space is very incredibly important for that. The EU has a great opportunity as being a huge block of a bunch of different states with lots of different capabilities. And as these questions about supply chains and resilience are being brought into play, making the most of that block is something that is understandably very important, and that regulation might be able to help with. In terms of full-on harmonization, I'll pass that fun little question over.
Since there are many aspects, but since the health aspects of the biotech are coming in December, I would mention, for example, we still have such difficulties with the healthcare systems because they're so separated from each other. It's so difficult to dig even little holes between our health systems. Of course, it's national policy, but for example, the access to new therapies. In some countries, they're coming years after they're approved in other countries within the EU. New medicines as well. In some countries, it comes like, for example, 2 years after they're already on the market of other countries. So with this pace, put aside the market opportunities for the companies, but it costs lives within the EU. So the better we harmonize at least this part, for example, the sooner, the better for the patients and for the citizens. So here, just 2 examples.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, and I would... when you look into some of the really mundane practicalities where you see the fragmentation occurring, it's like they're asking the same question in 27 different ways, using 27 different application processes, obviously 27 different languages. Often like, well, you can't go on the market in this country until you've been on the market in that country for 3 years. We need to fully wire up the single market in lots of different ways. And a lot of those appear to be fairly mundane things to do, even though they are incredibly complex to actually get done. Because everybody goes, yes, we should harmonise them all, but you should have it like we do in our country. Mm. So then you have 27 different conversations about what that harmonisation might look like. But we have to start doing it. I mean, some of our national associations in the Baltics, for example, are now working together to go, all right, how do we do these together for key, we're much stronger as a collection of 4 countries to speak to our national governments and say, please, could we do it all this way? And we can do it together. And suddenly we're a 4-country powerhouse, and it's much more attractive to do stuff here. So I think there's lots of different ways we can do this without sort of breaking the system.
Does the Biotech Act need to be prescriptive, or does it need to create for capitals to coordinate better?
I think there's going to be elements that work both ways. I mean, the first, I think we understand it's, there's going to be a heavily regulatory component of it. It's going to be a regulation. So that's very helpful in that it already starts to prevent the ways that things can fragment. We know Europe can fragment anything, given the opportunity, but at least that way we can choose things that you start from a better baseline.
Mm-hmm. All right, I want to ask the first question that we got that was with the person asking identified Delphine Taizi from Outreach Network for Gene Drive Research. I will confess I don't fully understand her question, but how does the EU reconcile its ambition to leverage biotech for competitiveness with its positions in the Global Policy Forum, where it is opposing exploring synbio benefits? Is this on the radar of anybody? No. Okay. Claire, you seem like you know a little bit. Maybe.
No, I mean, we do a lot of things at both national, European, and global levels. And what we do really try to do at global levels, because you've got like the TRIPS waiver, you've got the Pandemic Preparedness Treaty, you've got lots of things that happen at global level where policy can often seem a little bit misaligned with what we're doing here. But I also know at global level, it's a huge game of give and take. So I think that's probably a very large topic to start having right now with 57 seconds left on the clock.
Yeah. All right. Well, anyway, Delphine, and to all of you, as I said, if you give me your name, I will ask your question. But for now, I'm going to ask one last question. It is a hard one, but it's one that shouldn't need a long answer. What should the level of EU funding be in this act?
Can you be more specific? I'm really sorry, but can you be more specific about the question?
I mean, to what extent do you need funding for member states to implement? Does the industry expect support from this
It's a mix.
act?
I'm fully aware that we're not going to suddenly magic lots of new public money out of thin air. So for me, it's better strategic targeting of that money, and by using the regulatory changes to open up market access so it unplugs a lot of the private investment to come alongside it. It shouldn't always be a public push. You should see how much can be a market pull, and there the private investment will arrive really quickly.
Mm-hmm. Christopher?
I can't talk about figures, but what is important is, because we were discussing the different models we have. For example, now we want to create investment facility, but these are public money. So in reality, of course, you can't risk too much with the public money. And that will, again, be kind of an obstacle for risking with startups which may grow, but they can't get financing, because whoever decides about this fund should be very careful not to waste public money. So that's why it's very important to use these facilities to attract more private money, which are more ready to risk and to invest in risky businesses, which can then grow. What we see in the United States, for example. So we need more flexibility. We need more involvement of the European Investment Bank, which should create a platform where private business could be engaged. And if we create environment in which the private capital sees interest to invest, I think this would be the best option for the future of biotechnologies.
Captain, last word to you, kind of a sense of where money can be best targeted that should be kept in mind for this.
It's a great question. We did a piece of research a few years back on the financial ecosystem for pharmaceutical research and development. And there's a lot of interesting stuff in there. I know you're all dying to just go read it right now. But it is a lot about where funding can best be prioritized. Public sector funding, charity funding might be best placed to de-risk early stage research, where you might not be able to see prospect of a financial return, but the science itself is important. Again, coming back to the various levers that you've got to push on to make this a good, broader ecosystem. making a good ecosystem for venture capital, for instance, and also creating exit opportunities where larger scale biopharma can come in and invest that big money to get these things over the line. It really is about the entire pathway and figuring out where you can best put resources and from whom.
All right, and with that, we'll leave it there. It's been a really interesting discussion about creating a European biotech ecosystem as opposed to just copying the US and China. That means preserving rights, helping citizens understand what you see as the benefits to the economy, to their health, to farming, but also maybe, if we're honest, replicating a little more the environment in the US and in China in that the EU is not very harmonized, and so finding ways to deconflict and get everything a bit more aligned. So with that, thank you so much to our panelists. Thank you so much to the audience. And we do need to, before we close, take a look at the poll. The question was, what is Europe's biggest barrier to biotech innovation?
There you go.
All right.
Regulatory framework is a winner.
Well, we can see, yeah, that's pretty clear. So again, thanks to everyone who's here. Thanks to everyone who's watching online. If you're on site, you're welcome to stay for drinks. And as a final note, don't miss out on our flagship healthcare summit on November 18th and 19th. I will be there, so will all my colleagues. Registrations are closing soon, so don't miss it. Thanks so much.